I'm most excited about in social media is what companies are starting to do and figure out that they can do. They're just sort of an awakening now of companies not viewing it anymore or hoping that it goes away. They're actually saying, okay, I know it's here to stay. My customers are using it, so how can I start engaging with them? So just over the past 6 months, there's been this huge surge and people really adopting it and wanting to do something with it. So they're just at that very beginning. That's really exciting to see that stage of discovery.
And what are the main challenges?
The biggest one is they don't know what to do. They oftentimes people come to me and say, we need a Facebook strategy or we need a Twitter strategy, and that's like almost saying like, what are we going to do with the phone? And it's more about what your business goals are, understanding how these new tools can support your business goals. So having in mind the biggest goal of what you're trying to do and connecting it back to how you can use these technologies is the biggest challenge. That connection isn't there right now for most businesses. So if you're just starting out in social media, you don't have a designated social media team or social strategist, I think first of all you have to figure out, why do you want to engage with people? Why do you want to have this relationship? And if you can figure out why that is, then you can figure out, is there somebody in that existing department who can start experimenting with these tools, laying the groundwork to create the evidence that it's worth having further investment in it. At some point, though, you have to anticipate that this is going to have to move from being an experiment to something that's much more formalized. And at that time, you need a plan. You need to actually put resources against that. And the only way you can do that is to get your higher order of executives to understand what's happening. For the most part, they just want to delegate this. They don't want to get into it. It's a really hard place for them to understand what's happening. They don't use the tools themselves. So to the extent that you can help them do the very first step, just listen and learn from your customers. Just pull out mentions of the company. Explain to people, these are the conversations that people are having. If you do nothing else, before you engage, you have to listen and learn. So one of the questions comes along is, where does social media live? Especially the role of the social strategist. And my colleague Jeremiah Ayang is coming out with a new report next week about what is that role. So we did surveys, a lot of research into who are these people, where do they live in the organization, and we found that 41% of them live in the marketing department or corporate communications, and then another good level of people live in customer support. So very much customer facing. But I think at the same time, those levels increasingly are moving up into the organization as companies realize they need a strategy across their different areas of businesses, brands, product managers. We also see it happening and moving in a different direction, though. So while some of the more advanced companies are elevating the role of the social strategist, we also see people hiring entry-level people, where these are becoming what I think social strategists who become the social media help desk. So if you have to have a decision in terms of your strategy for the company. Do you want this to be elevated to help you craft the strategy of your customers? Or do you want it to have this role be something much more around implementation, helping the brands really get things out and not necessarily have a strategic view? You can have a lower investment doing the second, but I think you're better off thinking about what role strategically this person is going to play in the organization first, and then fill out the ranks of the people who will do the block and tackle work. So I wrote a book called Open Leadership that just came out this year. And the reason I wrote the book is that after I wrote the first book, Groundswell, people were asking, okay, I know I have to use these tools, but I have one problem. I don't like this feeling of being out of control, this need to be open. And by the way, how open do I need to be? How authentic, how transparent do I need to be? And if you're in this space, it sort of feels like a silly question, but it's actually a really good one. And I felt that these leaders who were going to have to lead the organizations and create the strategies for them didn't really understand how leadership was going to change, how strategy needed to change. And there's this gut-wrenching feeling that being open is dangerous and that it's not the right thing to do. Because in business, everything you're told as an executive, as a manager, is to control everything. And if social media teaches you one thing more than anything else, is that you are not in control. So this book is about how do you give up control, but at the same time still be in command so that you can get things done. So I lay out all the different ways you can be open, how it's changing the relationships, how leadership needs to change, and then finally how we can also transform your organization. And a key thing I talk about, one of my favorite chapters, is about the imperative to fail. about how relationships are never perfect. And in business, you are set up for failure. And it's about how do you create resilience and recovery inside of your organization so that you can do this with confidence. So the question often comes up, how do you get better at failure? How do you teach somebody how to fail? I think more than anything else, you make failure easier by saying, let's do small failures first and see that even if you fail in a small way, it's okay, you can recover and that the world doesn't end. So I encourage people to create what I call sandbox covenants. And these are where you define how open you will be, how engaged you will be using social technologies. And you define the walls very, very clearly. We will only be this open with this type of information with these people in these circumstances. And you write down the rules, the covenants, that inside that sandbox govern how you will engage, how you will play. And then you also write down the consequences of what happens if you step outside of those walls. And you define that very clearly for everybody. If you don't do this, then it's just nothing. You're just letting it to chance how people will engage, or you don't engage and you get into even more trouble. So by planning what happens, by having that discipline in place, you actually get more control, even though you're not. So what you find over time is that you can increase the size of that sandbox. It may be only so big in the beginning, but as you feel more confident, you'll actually start growing that. So failure is not something that anybody likes, but we all know we will fail. We all know that if we engage in business, we engage in business relationships, things will go wrong. And so I think as a leader, you need to anticipate what those things are that are going to go wrong and plan for it. That is your responsibility.